So, my journey to Flat Earth. How did I get here? I'm a product of the English comprehensive school system. I've lived all over the country, so I'm part southerner, part northerner. I moved around a lot. So it means that I'm less likely to really fully nail my colours to any particular flagpole, because I was brought up not on purpose obviously, but the way I was brought up meant that for me there were no permanent flagpoles. Everything was kinetic, everything was moving. Now, I'd always had an interest in history. I enjoyed history, English, physics. So I guess like all kids, I did like dinosaurs. I had lots of dinosaur books. I was interested in the process and the investigation. Even at a young age, I'd be flipping through a dinosaur book thinking, why are we so confident that that dinosaur was that shape and colour? How do we know it wasn't purple with pink spots? Even at that young age, I recognised the limitations of the evidence and the discrepancy between the presentation of the facts based on that evidence. At high school, I chose history as an option, and I chose physics as well. So you're very interested in space and NASA, as most kids probably would be. And then, as you grow into your teens, you start to become more aware of alternative things out there. I was introduced to the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail when I was quite young at school, maybe 14, 15 or so, when I read that. So obviously that was quite an eye-opener in many ways. One way was the information that it presented, and I saw then how something that was so radically detached from the mainstream paradigm, but it still dovetailed with the supposed evidence. And not only that, well, if this is so well researched and so on the button, and why isn't this talked of more? Why aren't people talking about the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail more? That was my introduction to conspiracies and the world of conspiracies, and some things the paradigm is just always going to ignore. I think when I was a kid and growing up, more than general history, my real interest was piqued by the paranormal, like the Reader's Digest book of the unexplained, compendium of paranormal. So all these things. So I read these things constantly as a child. So things like, obviously, all the UFO stuff, UFO abductions, vampires and werewolves, cryptozoology, ghosts, time slips and portals, things like the Green Man and fairies, stone circles, and the possibilities of different stories for the creation of the pyramids, and things like Cydonia on Mars. All these things were in the mix when I was coming of age, as it were, and none of this was really approached by school or the mainstream. So I'm learning in two different streams. One is formal education, and the other is my own, if you want to call it, research, learning. I didn't read a lot of fiction, I didn't read a lot of novels. I read a few, like Lord of the Rings, that's a coming of age book. But really I was reading UFO books, ghost books, paranormal, alternative ancient histories, that kind of thing, and wondering why this wasn't in the mainstream. And that process of wondering, regardless of what the evidence was, regardless of what the topic was, whether it was the pyramids or ghosts or vampires or Mary Celeste, whatever it was, the process of questioning why that doesn't appear in the mainstream, why that isn't part of the paradigm, is a good process, especially at a young age. So even though I didn't really understand it, I guess I was starting to see the disparity between the reality we're presented and the sort of everyday background reality of our everyday evidences. As I became an older teen, I think I focused on a couple of conspiracies. JFK was obviously a big one, and also there was obviously Apollo was really the obvious one. So those two things, JFK and Apollo. Now, when it came to the last years of the century, early 2000s, I was I was doing like a blog kind of website, and I used to do these top 10 lists. So one day I decided to do a post of top 10 conspiracy theories. So so this would have been about 2003, this list, because I went online to research some of these conspiracy theories just to put a couple of paragraphs about each one. So I had JFK, Apollo, I can't remember what else was on that list, but I was putting a list together, and I came across 9/11, and this was the first time I'd seen any reference to 9/11 being a conspiracy or an inside job. And there was just a single website talking about the destruction of the towers and how it had these graphics showing how they fell at free fall speed. And I don't know if I was shocked, I pretty much fell off my chair laughing, thinking that this is typical of your American conspiracy theorist, the stereotypical tinfoil hat wearing, guy in a basement, X-Files, the lone gunman kind of thing. Don't forget, during this point, all throughout the 90s, the X-Files had been big. We watched the X-Files continuously. So I think that was everybody's paradigm drip feed in the 90s. Now, I didn't quite complete this top 10 list. It was a bit of a weird thing, because the other thing that I came across was when I was looking into the Apollo conspiracy. Again, this was about 2003. I came across these websites that were basically talking about huge cities on the moon. So this was the first time I'd come across a schism inside a conspiracy theory. So you had the whole Apollo hoax, moon hoaxes, but then you had a whole other bunch of conspiracy nuts, I guess, who were absolutely determined that Apollo did go ahead, and not only did it go ahead, but that they found lots of evidence of huge abandoned cities, crashed spacecraft, possible alien corpses, all kinds of things. So just researching, mainly as an observer, as a journalist for this top 10 list, I had my mind cracked open by 9/11 and Apollo. And I never made it back. I never made it back to the top 10 list. I left the 9/11, but I went straight down that Apollo rabbit hole. By about 2008, I accidentally came across some concave Earth on David Icke's site. This was about 2008, and again, much like I had done with the 9/11 stuff previously, I just fell off my chair laughing, thought, you can't be serious, or what about all the NASA probes and satellites we've got out there? Now, in the meantime, whilst hanging out at this David Icke's website, I got sucked into the 9/11, and particularly the holographic planes, the no plane theory, and I spent a few years at David Icke's site, basically looking into 9/11 and the planes, and that was obviously a huge rabbit hole that did consume me a little bit, and from that it became clear that the whole conspiracy thing was more than just elements within a government. This was something that had been going on for a long time and was not relevant to nations and governments and personnel. This was a concerted program that had been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The true controllers, who were mainly invisible and anonymous, and our own leaders being puppets themselves. Around 2011-2012, the whole Jimmy Savile saga kicked off, and that was a major turning point. I was deeply involved in that at the David Icke site, and that did come close to pushing me over the edge and finishing me. That did. It was very intense, and it was that also the rabbit hole that I went down with the Jimmy Savile saga. It was that made me realise just how much of popular culture was controlled. So whereas before it was just really politics and the military and things like that, this was now, I was looking at everything: music, TV, just everything controlled. And this is where I started breaking into things like the Saturn Matrix, and things got deep and heavy, and I had to pull out at some point. It all got a bit too much and a bit intense, and I kind of pulled out and started sort of focusing more on myself, a bit more on my own mental health, figuring out what I wanted to do in this whole mess. I left my job in 2012. I walked out of my job Monday morning, 11:20, just walked. I didn't even resign, just walked out and stopped going. I couldn't reconcile what was going on with my mind and how I was thinking, and just being a bot at work. I had to do something. And so I took a bit of a rest from the whole, if you like, conspiracy stuff, and I'm not entirely sure what the trigger was in bringing me back, but I was looking at maps. I'd read a book about Mercator, Gerard Mercator, and I'd always been aware of the discrepancy of various map projections to reality, but reading the Mercator book made me realise a few things about that, just how subjective map projections are. And also there were a lot of clues in that Mercator book about past maps and did they, potential ancient knowledge of South America and the Americas, Antarctica. So reading this book on Mercator kind of sparked my interest a bit more, and I ended up watching some YouTube videos about maps and projections. And somehow from there I ended up at a Math Boyland video, Math Powerland, who was talking about being ushered into a room with some of his pals in the FBI, whatever it was, and them telling him that the Earth is flat, that all the photos are they're basically CGI, they're paintings, and of course I found this hilarious, and I don't know how long it took to catch me. It wasn't so much the flat earth people, it was the anti-NASA people. So there was a YouTube channel called Learn of the Jesuit Order, and he was one of the guys, I think, who broke the bubbles in space. So simultaneously I was looking at NASA from a faking point of view, and also the flat earth. So some of these people who were exposing NASA weren't journeying to the flat earth, they were just exposing NASA. So it was around about 2014 when I took a look at the movie Capricorn 1. Now, one of my hobbies and skills, I guess, is movies. I really enjoy all kinds of movies. I enjoy making movies. I enjoy the whole process. So one thing I've done from time to time is analysing movies, looking for themes and meta themes. There's also 9/11 appears in a lot of movies, and so after the whole Jimmy Savile thing and my sort of awareness of the Saturn matrix, I spent a lot of time analysing Hollywood movies very closely, looking at the symbolism there, and looking at how the paradigm was moulded and pushed, how so many elements were in there, all this Babylonian Saturn matrix, Freemasonry thing, so many 9/11 references. And then as I was analysing Capricorn 1, in Capricorn 1 there are quite a few flat earth references, so I'll dig those up again, and I will do another video on those at some other point. And by 2016 I think my flat earth position was, there was no going back. I'd looked at satellites, I'd looked at Coriolis effect, I'd looked into the curve, where is it, the space shuttle, NASA in general, the space race and space technology in general, the ISS, Tim Peake. You will never convince me that Tim Peake went to space. Never. He failed the most simple experiment to prove gravity, and his harness clearly has some kind of malfunction when he's spinning, when he's doing his famous NASA backflip. Now, so if Tim Peake never went to space, then Scott Kelly never went to space, and on and onwards. Then we get to like 2016, 2017, I think may have been the first references I saw to no trees on flat earth, which again was a mind-blowing concept. And that's the thing with flat earth, once you accept that as a possibility, a lot of other things suddenly suggest themselves and fall into place. Hollow earth dovetails perfectly with flat earth. So yeah, I liked the no trees idea, and I'm coming more towards the idea of an enclosed dome rather than an infinite plane. And lately, I I'm mainly going with an enclosed system, basically very much like the lens of an eye. But for the time being, that's my highly personal and anecdotal route to the flat Earth, and that's where I am today. Listless, rudderless, really don't know what to do for the future. The only thing I'm really certain about at the moment is I need to get out of the city. I don't want to be in the city in the next decade. I think I'm going to be rough, and it's going to be rough in a city. So anyway, peace out and keep it flat.